Development today on the weather front, and of course we just talked about a few days ago marking 6 months since Hurricane Helene devastated the southeast and also our area, specifically North Carolina and South Carolina. We just learned that it sounds like Helene is going to officially be retired as a name. And so here to talk more about that, we have one of our meteorologists, Becca Birdsall, to explain how the process works, I guess, when it comes to deciding whether names get to stay in rotation and what goes into the decision to pull a name from that rotation. So thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to be here. And you know what? This is something that we have been anticipating for the World Meteorological Organization, which is WMO for short, to retire Hurricane Helene. And they typically do that when there is so much damage and destruction that a tropical storm does. And they don't want any more confusion with it, which is why they have 6 different lists that rotate out every single year. So they decided to retire 4 names on that list. Those include Beryl, which was previously a Category 5 hurricane, Helene, Milton, and Jake. And those are going to be replaced by Brianna, Holly, Miguel, and Jake as well. So of course, Helene was the 7th costliest hurricane on record. This is why it is no surprise that that name is getting retired. Again, it is something that we have been waiting for, and it's a lot easier when we have these named storms that get retired, because it's good for the public to know when they have a named storm that is coming their way. It is good for them to know what they can expect from it.
So, I mean, obviously, we just alluded to, Becca, the fact that we just marked 6 months since Helene. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And also, I don't know why, it feels like a short time since it happened, and it also feels like it's been forever, maybe just because of all the trauma that our community sustained. It just felt like a lifetime worth of trauma, all in just a matter of a few days. But we saw large loss of life. We talked about close to 250 people who lost their lives throughout the U.S. Because of this storm, and then the high damage, that it cost. You mentioned, as far as the costliness, it's the 7th costliest, but it sounds like the storm also ranks pretty high when it comes to the fatalities.
That's right. I believe it was up to 248, which was the official report that came out. And what made Helene so unique is the impacts were felt beyond the coastline, as this made landfall and on the Florida Gulf Coast. And so the impacts were felt, especially with the landslides and, of course, all of the heavy rainfall that was felt between both North and South Carolina, which is why, again, the Helene name is certainly going to be retired and is going to be felt by this community for a very long time as they continue to recover from this.
Yeah, and even still talking about some of the impacts and the headlines that continue to come from the storm, we talk about the fact that, we still have the state that's trying to allocate money to help rebuild. We've heard Governor Josh Stein talking about, continuing to try to advocate to the federal government for billions of dollars, because he says that, the money just is not here in North Carolina to completely bounce back from this storm. So, it's just amazing and heartbreaking to think, how much of an impact the storm continues to have. I'm just kind of curious, your perspective as a meteorologist. We talked about the reasoning behind retiring Helene, and how it sounds like a lot of it is really just about maybe messaging and making sure that the public has a good understanding and maybe doesn't get confused with this storm versus like another storm, another Helene that might ever happen again, which obviously it won't at this point. But how do you feel as a meteorologist about the importance of being able to communicate to the public accurately what's happening in a clear, concise manner? Because I feel like that can be kind of tricky sometimes.
For sure. When you put a name on a system, you can follow it from start to finish. So especially with tropical systems, a lot of times they impact the Caribbean or over the Atlantic before they actually get here. So when you can follow a system from start to finish as it continues to push closer and closer to the U.S., then people start to really, really pay attention. Of course, with the National Hurricane Center doing those cones so far out in advance, it gives people that advance notice that, hey, Helene or Beryl or Milton is coming your way, and you can follow it as it goes towards Florida or towards the Gulf Coast states and eventually impacting your area. And people really pay attention to a name for sure. And that is why, we can't have another Hurricane Helene. That would be a very confusing message. So we actually do have the list of the new tropical storm names that are coming up. Hurricane season is June 1st, and we are pushing into the start of May, so it will be here before you know it. If we can pull up the list. Yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Starts with Andrea, Barry, Chantel, and yours truly made the list. Rebecca is on there.
I noticed that. Spelled just like you spell it,
exactly,
right?
yes.
That's
This is always a very diverse list of names, some of them very tricky spellings and pronunciations, but hopefully we won't get as far as to Rebecca.
Yeah, I remember the one year, it wasn't actually too long ago, where we got into the Greek alphabet because we had already gone through all the normal names. And you mentioned how there is a diverse, scope of names. I think I remember somebody on our team telling me that it has something to do with the basin and the countries maybe within the basin. I don't know if you've heard that as well, like how they pick the names.
Yes, I have heard that theory before, and it makes sense as the Atlantic hurricane names impact way more than just the United States. A lot of the Caribbean islands, of course, Mexico, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. You gotta think about those places too that are very much impacted by these storms.
Okay, really quick before we let you go, you mentioned that we're still a ways away from the hurricane season this year, but it is never too early to prepare. So what would you be telling folks right now as far as getting ready?
I think just having ways to be aware, knowing what the weather is going to be, whether if it's you checking our WCNC weather app, whether it's you checking in online with our weather forecast, just having ways to be aware of what is coming your way. And of course, having emergency alerts available on your phone and having a weather radio just in case of any sort of weather emergency, just kind of like what we saw with Helene with all of those flash flood emergency warnings. Having a way to be able to get those warnings is going to be my biggest advice.